On a high hill above the Hudson River, a house glows against the dark. Long stone terraces step down toward the trees. Fountains stand still. The windows of Kekwit, the great house of the Rockefeller family, shine with a soft yellow light. From far away, it looks peaceful, almost holy. Up close, it feels different. The gravel drive loops like a guarded path. The gates are heavy. The air is too quiet. This is not just a home. It is a fortress built by the richest family in American history. A family whose name still makes people think of power, greed, and secrets. Tonight, we are not looking at the paintings on the walls or the gardens in the brochures. We are walking into the shadows that built these mansions and filled them with fear. If you stand on the terrace at night, the river below is just a dark strip between the hills. Inside, the rooms are lined with tapestries, carved wood, and rare art. Under your feet, deep below the stone floors, lie tunnels, bunkers, and archives where the family stored its records and guarded its past. This house was meant to feel timeless and safe, but the fortune that paid for it came from a company that people hated so much that crowds marched in the streets, threw bricks, and tried to bomb the estate. The mansions of the Rockefellers were not simple trophies. They were shields against a country that had turned on the man who built them. The story begins far from any mansion. John D. Rockefeller was born in 1839 in rural New York State. His family was poor and often on the move. As a boy, he kept ledgers and counted every coin. He liked order, numbers, and control. When the oil boom began in Pennsylvania, he saw more than wild wells and quick money. He saw a chance to build something huge and stable. By his early 30s, he was running refineries in Cleveland, turning crude oil into kerosene for lamps. In 1870, he and a few partners formed Standard Oil. It looked like a normal business on paper. In reality, it soon became something very different. Rockefeller believed in crushing chaos. In the oil world, chaos meant small refiners fighting over barrels, railroads fighting over rates, and wild price swings that scared investors. He decided that the only way to fix this was to control everything. Standard Oil bought rivals, merged refineries, and signed secret deals with railroads that gave his company special low shipping rates. Competitors often paid more to send their oil than Standard did. If a refiner refused to sell out, Standard Oil could cut prices in that region until the rival collapsed or gave up. A few rivals became partners. Many simply disappeared. To Rockefeller, this was good business. To those he destroyed, it felt like war. In the oil towns, rumors about Standard Oil spread fast. People said the company had spies inside other firms, that it created fake companies, and that it punished anyone who did not bend. In her famous study, The History of the Standard Oil Company, the journalist Ida Tarbell laid out how secret railroad rebates, aggressive price cuts, and hidden agreements helped Standard Oil turn into a near-total monopoly. Her work reached readers all over the country. Many of them already hated the trust. Her words gave that anger a clear target. Communities in oil regions felt that their local businesses had been strangled. Tarbell described those towns as full of hate, suspicion, and fear. By the early 1900s, Standard Oil controlled most of the refining and distribution of oil in the United States. The company was extremely profitable. That profit flowed straight into the hands of John D. Rockefeller and his family. But with power came backlash. Cartoonists drew Standard Oil as a huge octopus with tentacles wrapped around the Capitol, the White House, and the world. Populist politicians called Rockefeller the most dangerous man in America. Journalists linked his company to broken small businesses and ruined lives. The trust became a symbol of everything ugly about big business. The more money Rockefeller made, the more he felt the heat. The federal government finally acted. In 1906, lawyers for the United States filed a case against Standard Oil under the Sherman Antitrust Act. The case went up to the Supreme Court. In 1911, the court ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal restraint of trade. The justices ordered the trust broken into dozens of separate companies. It was a historic blow. Headlines said the great monopoly was dead. In public, it looked like a defeat. In private, the Rockefellers became even richer because the smaller companies gained value, and they still held large shares in them. But the message from Washington was clear. The country no longer trusted the power that had built the Rockefeller name. Before the public turned, John D. Rockefeller had lived in fairly modest homes for a man of his wealth. In Cleveland, he and his wife, Laura, lived in a brick house at Euclid and Case Avenues on what became known as Millionaire's Row. It was comfortable, but not flashy. In the 1870s, Rockefeller bought land on a hill east of Cleveland and created Forest Hill, a quiet estate with a large Victorian home, winding drives, and views over the city and Lake Erie. Forest Hill became the family summer place, a retreat where he could walk under trees instead of smokestacks and think about how to guard his growing fortune. The pattern was set. As the oil empire expanded, the family world moved farther from public streets and deeper into private land. In New York City, Rockefeller chose not to build a gleaming palace on Fifth Avenue the way other tycoons did. Instead, he bought a brownstone on West 54th Street, across from land that would later hold a row of fine townhouses. His son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., and junior wife Abby later used one of those limestone houses at 13 West 54th Street as their city home. The style was calm and proper. Inside, though, plans were already forming for something much larger and more secure. In the 1890s and early 1900s, John D. Rockefeller began to buy pieces of land in Pocantico Hills, north of New York City, above the Hudson River. He did it quietly, through agents, so that prices would not jump. Farm by farm, woodland by woodland, the Rockefeller name spread over the ridge. On the highest point, he planned a stone house that would look out over the river and down toward Manhattan. He called it Kijkwit, from a Dutch word for lookout. Finished in its grand form around 1913, the mansion had dozens of rooms, broad terraces, and formal gardens. It was serious, heavy, and controlled, exactly like the man who ordered it built. Under the beautiful surface of Kijkwit lay its most secret features. The house was supported by deep basements and a network of service corridors. Tunnels ran under the gardens and between buildings. These passageways carried pipes and cables and let servants move without being seen. On the wider estate, another structure known as Hillcrest gained a 3-story underground bunker. That bunker became the Rockefeller Archive Center, a hidden library that stores more than a century of family and foundation papers behind thick walls and steel shelves. Even the coach barn, a massive stone building larger than the main house, was later turned into a private conference center where world leaders, scholars, and policymakers met in closed gatherings far from cameras. The Pocantico estate became like a private kingdom. The family funded a nearby school and a small church with stained glass windows by famous artists. The hamlet of Pocantico Hills sat completely surrounded by Rockefeller land. Staff houses, farms, and service buildings made the estate almost self-sufficient. You could be born on Rockefeller land, work on it, worship on it, and be buried near it. For the family, that closed circle felt safe and orderly. For critics, it looked like proof that one family had gathered too much land, too much power, and too much control. Then came a crisis that showed just how much anger surrounded the name. In 1913 and 1914, coal miners in southern Colorado went on strike against Colorado Fuel and Iron, a company owned in large part by the Rockefeller family. The miners lived in tent camps after being driven from company housing. On April 20th, 1914, state militia and company guards attacked one of these camps near a place called Ludlow. Tents burned, people were shot, and at least 21 people were killed, many of them women and children. Newspapers called it the Ludlow Massacre. Across the country, people blamed John D. Rockefeller Jr., who oversaw the company from his office in New York. While the tents in Colorado smoldered, life at Pocantico seemed a world away. Yet the violence followed the family home. In New York City, protesters gathered outside the offices at 26 Broadway to denounce Rockefeller Jr. When he tried to escape to the country estate, anarchists and union supporters came, north too. They marched near the gates at Tarrytown and planned attacks against the property. In July of that year, a group of radicals carrying dynamite toward the estate died when their bomb exploded in an East Harlem apartment. Police later said the target was the Rockefeller home. The blast helped push the city to create its first bomb squad. The message was simple. The mansions were no longer private worlds. They were targets in a national battle over power and justice. The Ludlow Massacre broke more than lives in Colorado. It scarred Rockefeller Jr. Under pressure from public anger, congressional hearings, and church leaders, he tried to repair his image. He hired a labor expert named Mackenzie King and a public relations advisor named Ivy Lee. They told him to visit the mines, talk with workers, and create new councils where miners could speak to the company. At the same time, he leaned harder into philanthropy, giving huge sums to universities, churches, and public causes. These gifts were often planned and directed from within the walls of his estates. Many critics saw them as an attempt to wash away guilt. In any case, the fortune that built Kikuit and Forest Hill was now being used to try to control not only oil and coal, but also memory. As the years went on, the family mansion network spread across the map. In Cleveland, Forest Hill remained the beloved summer home until the main house burned down in 1917. The land was later turned into a neighborhood and park, but traces of the old estate layout still shape the streets. In New York, the modest brownstone on West 54th Street gave way to something massive. Around 1913, Rockefeller Jr. built a new house at 10 West 54th Street. It rose 7 floors above the street and was widely called the largest private residence in the city. Inside were grand salons, galleries, a private art collection, and even an open-air sleeping porch where family members could rest in what they believed was fresh, healthy air above the city. The block around 10 West 54th Street slowly turned into a Rockefeller stronghold. Across the street stood earlier family townhouses at 13 and 15 West 54th, used first as homes and later as offices and as the Museum of Primitive Art, founded by Nelson Rockefeller. The mansions face the growing Museum of Modern Art, which the family helped create and support. Day and night, trucks and cars came and went. Staff slipped through side doors. Guards watched the sidewalks. For a time, this strip of limestone houses formed one of the last true mansion rows in Midtown Manhattan. They were islands of old wealth in a sea of rising office towers. Far to the north, in Maine, the family built another retreat. On Mount Desert Island, above the village of Seal Harbor, John D. Rockefeller Jr. bought a cottage and expanded it into a large Tudor-style home called the Eyrie. Terraces stepped down the slope, framing views of mountains and sea. With more guidance from landscape architect Beatrix Ferrand, the grounds were shaped into meadows, paths, and gardens that looked natural, but were carefully planned to frame every view. The Eyrie appeared on postcards and became a symbol of old summer society in the region. After Abby Aldrich Rockefeller died, the children chose to demolish the house, leaving only the famous Abby Aldrich Rockefeller Garden and the surrounding landscape. Even in death, the mansion did not fully disappear. Its gardens still carry the family name and vision. By the middle of the 20th century, the Rockefeller Mansion empire stretched from Ohio to New York, from Maine to other private properties across the country. Some houses were quiet, rarely seen in the news. Others were front and center in a public life. While John D. Rockefeller Sr. faded from the scene, living out his later years mostly at his estates and a house in Florida, his children and grandchildren stepped into roles in business, art, and politics. They used their homes both as refuges and as stages. The great irony was clear. The walls meant to hide the family from the world could not fully block the spotlight. One of the most powerful heirs was Nelson Rockefeller, son of John Jr. and Abby. He helped develop Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, served as governor of New York for 14 years, and later became Vice President of the United States. His official offices sat in tall buildings, but much of his real life played out in Rockefeller houses. The townhouses on West 54th Street held his art collections and the Museum of Primitive Art. They also held his private offices and, eventually, the rooms where his life would end in scandal. Nelson's marriage to Mary Rockefeller ended in divorce in the early 1960s. Soon after, he married Margaretta Happy Murphy, who had children from a previous marriage. At a time when divorce and remarriage still carried heavy social weight, especially for national politicians, this hurt his chance to become president. For many voters, the idea of a divorced Rockefeller in the White House seemed wrong. The mansions that once made the family look stable and noble now served as reminders of private choices that clashed with public values. Behind those stone walls, pressure and expectation worked on every relationship. In 1961, tragedy struck another branch in a way that shook the family and fed dark rumors for decades. Nelson's son, Michael Rockefeller, only 23 years old, traveled to Dutch New Guinea to collect art from the Asmat people for his father's museum. During a trip by catamaran along the coast, the boat capsized. Michael and an anthropologist clung to the overturned hull through the night. In the morning, Michael tied gasoline cans to himself as floats and tried to swim to shore. He vanished. Despite searches by air and sea, no body was ever found. Officials said he most likely drowned. But stories began to spread that he might have reached shore and been killed by members of a local group in revenge for an earlier raid by Dutch forces. Some reports claimed he was eaten. Books, films, and articles chased this story for years, but no proof has settled it. The Rockefeller family had all the money in the world, yet they could not buy an answer. 17 years later, in 1978, another loss struck near the heart of the Mansion empire. John D. Rockefeller III, grandson of the original oil tycoon and a leader in the family philanthropic efforts, died in a car crash in Mount Pleasant, New York, only a short distance from the Pocantico estate. He was 72. A tire blew, his car crossed the road, and another vehicle hit him head-on. For a man who had spent his life working on cultural programs, Asia-related projects, and charitable boards, it was a sudden and brutal end. His death echoed through the quiet halls of Kane and through the wider network of museums and institutions tied to his name. The most talked about Rockefeller death, though, was Nelson. On the night of January 26, 1979, he suffered a heart attack in a private apartment tied to the family complex on West 54th Street. With him was Megan Marshak, a young aide. Early reports from family spokesmen said he died in his office at Rockefeller Center. Within days, that story changed. It became clear that he had collapsed in Marshak Townhouse and that there had been a long delay before anyone called an ambulance. There was no autopsy. Nelson's body was quickly cremated. Reporters and comedians filled in the gaps with jokes and dirty stories, saying he had died during an affair. For a family that had spent generations trying to control every detail of its image, it was a humiliating final scene, played out not in a boardroom or a public hall, but in a private mansion bedroom. While these tragedies and scandals unfolded, the physical mansions themselves were changing. The Forest Hill estate in Cleveland, once the place where John D. Rockefeller walked the hills and watched over the city, lost its great house to fire in 1917. The land was later turned into a residential district and park shared between East Cleveland and Cleveland Heights. Only the layout of roads and some stone walls suggests the old estate. The Euclid Avenue house that had once seemed so grand became just another lost piece of Millionaire's Row as the street filled with offices and shops. In Maine, the Erie vanished as well. After the death of Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, her children chose to tear down the summer house. For them, it was expensive to maintain and tied to a world that no longer fit their lives. They kept the gardens and surrounding land, which today are preserved as the Abby Aldrich Rockefeller Garden and a carefully managed landscape around Little Long Pond. Visitors walk the trails and admire the views without seeing the huge house that once ruled the hill. The decision to erase the mansion while keeping the land shows how the family tried to soften its image. The stone symbol of private power is gone. The public sees wildflowers, trees, and art instead. Even the towering house at 10 West 54th Street did not last, as Midtown Manhattan turned into a forest of office towers and apartment blocks. The idea of a single family living in a 9-story mansion in the middle of the city began to feel strange and wasteful. After the family moved uptown and then to Park Avenue, the house was sold and later demolished. On that block today, careful eyes can still pick out the remaining Rockefeller townhouses at 13 and 15 West 54th Street, which have been protected as landmarks. Yet the largest and most private of the Rockefeller City mansions is only a memory, preserved in old photographs and family stories. At Pocantico, the story took a different path. Rather than tearing down Kane and the estate buildings, the family slowly opened parts of them to the public. The main house became a national trust property, managed with a partner organization. Visitors can now tour certain rooms, see the art collection, and walk among the gardens. The coach barn, once filled with horses and carriages, now hosts conferences on world issues. The surrounding land has been partly turned into a state park with miles of carriage roads open for hiking and riding. But even here, not everything is open. The archive bunker remains closed to casual visitors. Some houses on the estate are still in private use. Parts of the land remain off limits, held inside the old circle of family control. What was the secret purpose behind this spread of mansions, tunnels, and compounds? On the surface, the answer seems simple. The Rockefellers needed homes, privacy, and places to store their collections and papers. They had the money to build whatever they wanted. But when you look at how and when these places grew, another pattern appears. Every time public anger rose, the family drew deeper into its estates. When Standard Oil faced attack, land purchases at Pocantico increased. When Ludlow turned the family into a symbol of heartless capital, the estate became more than a retreat. It became a control center with expert advisors, private meeting rooms, and later a conference center where labor relations, philanthropy, and policy could be planned away from prying eyes. When the empire was broken by the Supreme Court, the family retreated to these safe hills to rethink how to present itself to the nation. The hidden tunnels and bunkers were not built to hide monsters from stories. They were built to hide something much more real. They hid staff so that service could be invisible. They hid records and archives so that the family could decide what scholars would see and when. They hid security systems and movement paths so that important guests could arrive and leave without ever stepping onto a public road. This is not unusual for great estates, but here it took on a special meaning. The family that once controlled the flow of oil and railroad traffic now controlled the flow of information about itself. It could open a gallery and close a filing room. It could show the world a garden and lock a bunker door. Inside the mansions, the emotional cost of this power played out over generations. Children grew up under constant protection, with guards, tutors, and staff watching them. They knew their name carried weight and expectation. Some tried to live up to it through public service or art. Some rebelled in private ways. Some, like Michael, chased adventure far from the safety of Pocantico and paid the price. Wives carried the burden of public image and private pain. Marriages strained under the pressure of politics, business, and constant attention. Inheritance decisions created quiet rivalries between branches. Old estates were passed down, split, or sold. Some branches stepped away from the core fortune and faded from the main story. Others stayed close and felt the weight of every decision. The breakup of Standard Oil changed the meaning of the mansions in another way. Before 1911, they were fortresses of an active empire. After the court decision, they became more like museums of a system that had changed. The oil companies that grew from the pieces of Standard Oil went on to dominate energy markets for decades, but they no longer belonged to one family alone. The Rockefeller share was still huge, yet the legal and public landscape was different. In this new era, the family poured energy into philanthropy. They created foundations, funded universities, built public buildings, and backed scientific research. The estates became command posts of giving instead of command posts of direct business control. But the line between generosity and self-protection was always blurred. Giving money to the world made it easier for the world to forgive the past. In later decades, some heirs focused on art and culture. Abby Aldrich Rockefeller helped start the Museum of Modern Art. Nelson and others filled their homes with modern paintings and sculptures. At Kaikwit, the gardens now display works by famous artists. To a visitor, this looks like simple love of beauty. But art also became a way to rewrite the story of the fortune. A company known for squeezing prices and crushing rivals now had its name on museums, concert halls, and conservation projects. The mansions were the perfect backdrop for this new image. They gave guided tours, careful lighting, and trained docents who spoke about creativity and vision instead of monopoly and massacre. Still, the darker threads of the story have never fully gone away. Historians continue to study the tactics of Standard Oil and the role of Rockefeller money in American life. Labor scholars return to Ludlow as a symbol of how far companies will go to crush workers. Books and films revisit the disappearance of Michael Rockefeller and the unanswered questions around it. Journalists still mention the strange circumstances of Nelson last night when they talk about the family. Every time these stories surface, they cast a shadow back over the estates, the tunnels, and the great halls. The walls stand firm, but the narrative around them shifts with each new generation of writers. Today, the mansion empire of the Rockefellers looks softer on the surface. Kaikwit welcomes tourists on sunny afternoons. Forest Hill has become a public park and a neighborhood where children play on the land where John and his family once walked. The Abby Aldrich Rockefeller Garden opens for limited visits each summer, with careful paths and blooming borders. The townhouses on West 54th Street stand guarded but alive, with restaurants and offices behind their stone fronts. Many people who pass these places each day have no idea how strongly they shape the story of wealth and power in the United States. What remains behind the beauty is a hard lesson. The mansions of the Rockefeller family were not accidents. They were built on purpose, in places where the family could see and not be seen, could act and not be touched, could store secrets and display only what they chose. They rose on hills, faced rivers, and looked out over cities that had been changed by oil money. Hidden tunnels tied the buildings together. Deep vaults stored papers and treasures. Staff learned to move like ghosts. All of it was meant to protect a name that had been earned through ruthless methods many people hated. In the end, the dark story of the Rockefeller Mansion Empire is not about ghosts walking the halls. It is about the human cost of power. It is about miners in Colorado who died in burning tents while their employer sat 2,000 miles away behind stone walls. It is about small oil refiners who lost their life's work when Standard Oil came to town. It is about children who grew up in luxury but watched brothers vanish into the sea, uncles die in sudden crashes, and fathers collapse under scandal. It is about a family that tried to shape the world, then had to spend generations and fortunes trying to reshape what the world thought of them. If you stand once more on the terrace at Kaikwit as the sun goes down, you can hear the fountains begin to run and see the first lights of the Hudson Valley below. The stone under your hand is cool and solid. The view is grand. It is easy to feel impressed. But now you also know what paid for this stone and what these walls were built to hold back. The mansions still stand, calm and beautiful, but the darkness tied to the Rockefeller name has not melted away. It lives in court records, in graves in Colorado, in missing person files from New Guinea, and in the memories of a country that once turned on a single man and his oil empire. The houses may look like safe castles, but they are really mirrors. When we look at them, we see not just the story of one rich family, but the price that whole societies pay when wealth and power pool behind gates and stay there for generations.